Welcome to In the Black, where we celebrate stories of transformation, resilience, and rising into the life you were meant to live. I'm your host, Aracelli, and this space was created to amplify voices often overlooked. Women who've come through the fire with wisdom, strength, and heart. Whether you're here for healing, clarity, or just good conversation, you belong here. Let's get into it. Today's guest is someone who turned a very personal battle into a global mission. Brian Sachetta is the author of the Get Out of Your Head book series and the founder of the mental health platform of the same name. After spending over a decade navigating anxiety and depression, Brian made a powerful decision not just to heal, but to help. Through his writing, research, and advocacy, he now supports people around the world who feel trapped in their own thoughts, overwhelmed by their emotions, and unsure how to move forward. His work reminds us that healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small, brave choices made daily. Today, we're talking about his journey, his latest book, Get Out of Your Head, Volume 2, Navigating the Abyss of Depression, and what it truly means to reclaim your life from the inside out. Brian, welcome to the In the Black podcast.
Hey, Aracelli, thank you for having me. That was a great intro.
You're welcome. Absolutely. Will you take some time and introduce yourself? Who is Brian? And just tell us a little bit about yourself before we dive in to your whole story.
Yeah, I don't know if I can do it much better than you did, but I'm Brian Sachetta, owner and author of Get Out of Your Head, branded book series focused on helping folks overcome anxiety and depression. I always say I'm not a doctor, I'm not a clinician. I came to this space through personal experience of dealing with my own anxiety and my own depression for many years. And you had said I came here and I wanted to heal and I also wanted to help, right? Or some combination of those two things. And I have always looked at the work as I heal through the work and I am also able to help other people, which is just it's nice that it goes that way. So the writing is always cathartic for me and helps me work through my emotions, and it's a wonderful outcome or byproduct that as a result of that I'm able to help other people. So it's a meaningful and supportive endeavor and pursuit on multiple levels for me. And yeah, the goal is really just trying to let folks who are out there struggling with the same things know that they're not alone, know that there are ways to keep making progress through the challenges of anxiety and depression and give them something of an emotional support system.
Who is Brian behind the work?
Yeah, it's funny because I think one of the challenges is like I've been trying to do the writing and podcasting and all that, and that takes up a lot of my nights and weekends, leaving me not all that much room for, the things that I necessarily enjoy as much. And I will also say, like, I'm a software developer full time, and that's how I pay my bills, keep the lights on, and whatnot. And one thing that has been a important revelation for me the last few years is understanding or finally seeing that even though I love my writing and I want to help folks and whatnot, I have been kind of pushing myself a little bit too hard or probably way too hard the last few years. So I've really like kind of gotten to the place where my body is just like rebelling and I'm a little bit burned out. So I'm purposefully trying to scale back a bit so that way I don't burn all the way out, but I still want to keep my eye on the goal of helping other people and whatnot. And so all that is to say that at times I have lost sight of those other things that I care about and that I enjoy. And so part of my own healing in this exact moment is reintegrating some of those things. So what are those things? What does Brian like to do? Music is a big one for me. You could probably tell a little bit maybe through the branding of my books and website. There's kind of like a heavy metal theme going on in there. So heavy metal has always been an important and crucial outlet for me. It's like one of the ways that I work through my emotions. I like other genres as well. I love listening to rap music and dance music and country and all that. Music is just one of the ways that like I can hear my soul speak to me and it helps me process things. So that's really important. Some of the other things I like to do, I have always been a little bit of an adrenaline junkie. So I love going to theme parks, going on big roller coasters. And I live in Boston, so there's not too many nearby. But, it's cold in Boston, especially like 6 months out of the year. So it's a nice excuse to get somewhere warmer. I like going to warmer climates. And in some of those other places, there's theme parks. So I get to go to Florida, go on some roller coasters, that kind of thing, so that's fun. And I obviously, most males, right, stay occupied with the sports. So I watch football a lot and basketball with my friends. It's a pastime that allows us to have a little bit of fun and stuff like that. So yeah, definitely trying to keep my eye or put my eye back on some of those passion projects. That way, I don't burn myself out or continue to do so. So
Awesome. Yeah, I get it. I get it. It's well, I was sick during this 2 months of sickness. I have had no voice a lot of times, so I've had to cancel the podcast. I didn't have a voice last week, so thank God I have one this week. Yeah, so it's been interesting trying to balance. I actually made a podcast to, tell the audience, "Hey, I'm gonna take 2 weeks off, Christmas and New Year's." So, I was hoping I'd feel better and catch up, and nope, I was still sick. It's like, maybe I should have came back in February. But this is the first time ever to actually take a break for 2 episode releases. All right. Well, let's get into the first question. So, can you take us back to when you first realized something wasn't right with your mental health?
the very first time I ever realized that would have been 2007 or 2008. I was 17 or 18 years old, sometime around my senior year of high school. And, I think, especially for folks who struggle with their mental health, like there are sometimes more signs if you go back, further into the past and you're like, oh, well, that was kind of interesting or that might have been something. But the first time that it really became apparent to me was when I was in high school, late high school, and I started, this was kind of the first time that I ever really started dating. And as I started dating, I realized that I was nervous all the time. And, around this time as well was I'm in high school, I'm in athletics, so I'm going, I have basketball games and track meets and that sort of thing. So that kind of this whole year, maybe junior year, maybe senior year, just starting to feel like nervous all the time around dating and the track meets and basketball games and that kind of thing. And, at first I would kind of just say to myself, like, yeah, like people get nervous for basketball games and it'll go away and whatnot. And like, it would like, it kind of would. But the thing that I kept coming back to was, kind of the almost the definition for like what's the difference between some anxiety or some nervousness and then like an anxiety disorder itself, and it's really like the level and pervasiveness of that feeling, right? And so I kept thinking to myself like, yeah, I have a track meet and it's a week away, but I'm like insanely nervous and I can barely think right now, and the meet is 6 days away, or I'm going on a date but it's 4 days away and I'm so anxious about it, I'm so nervous about it. And so once I remember being in class in high school and kind of having this moment thinking to myself like, yeah, that is like a week away. This is not, I'm not saying it's not normal, but it's no way to live, right? To be anxious all the time and then just turn the page to another event and say, well, okay, I got through the track meet, but now there's another meet 7 days from now. Like that was just daunting to think about. I had very little understanding or like no knowledge of mental health or anxiety or anything like that. But I just thought to myself, like, this really kind of stinks. I hope I don't have to live my life this way for the rest of my life. And fast forward, a couple months or within that time frame, I go on a date with somebody that I like. I think it was date 3 or 4, but things are they seem like they're not going so well. You can just kind of feel when the vibe is off or whatever. And so I'm very nervous going into the date. And then, like, long story short, I actually end up having a panic attack on that date. And there's a lot of reasons why, but one of the reasons was the fact that there was a lot of uncertainty in the relationship, and I just felt like the vibe was off. And I remember having that and being so freaked out and so scared, and kind of having this split reaction of one part of me said, okay, that was bad. And you got to go figure out what that was and you got to go address it. And the other half of me was like, I want to bury this thing and I want to never think about it again. I want to pretend like it didn't happen. I want to just move on. But that was that moment where even if part of my brain wanted to just move on, the other part was like it couldn't let it go. And so I spent many, many months just thinking about like almost looking around every corner, and being like, when is the next anxiety attack going to hit me? Where is it lurking? How do I avoid it? That kind of thing. And that essentially, around that time period, and I do talk about this in my first book as well, is I went off to college, 6 months after that first panic attack. I went and I met a new girl that I was interested in, and I had a panic attack in front of her. And after that, that was when it was like, oh goodness, I can't push this down anymore. I can't pretend as though this isn't happening. I really had to admit to myself that I was seriously struggling and I needed to do something. Now the challenge, right, was like I was 18. This is 2008. The internet is a very different place. The conversation around mental health is very different. It's much smaller at this point in time. And it's just hard for me to really, because of those things, it's hard for me to really admit to myself and really throw myself into this venture. I think my subconscious really knew that I needed to figure it out and heal myself, but it was just a difficult time culturally and whatnot, where the idea of talking about this with other people and using other folks to try to heal myself and whatnot, as in like getting advice from them, going to therapy and whatnot, that sounded so daunting to me. So it was, I think I came to the space from a place of feeling really lost. And eventually, and I don't recommend this to folks, but eventually, like kind of white knuckling it and figuring it out on my own over the course of a decade, or, with the help of some people, a therapist here or there or whatever. But I look back and I think to myself, like, if times were different, if I were different, I would have approached it differently. I would have tried to, talk to a lot more people, get through this a lot faster. And when I talk to other people and I relay this story, I'm like, please don't do what I did. Please, if you feel those feelings, if you feel like you are struggling, like go get help. There's no shame in it. I know it's challenging. I know it stinks to like speak up and admit that you're struggling, but like the real goal, right, is to feel better. And so if you're holding all of that in, it becomes a lot harder to feel better. And I do wish that, at those younger ages, I wish I had the tools at my disposal to be able to speak up and feel as though I was empowered to do so. Um, that's really what sparked the journey of my Get Out of Your Head brand, was feeling, being a lost 18-year-old in the world and saying, I don't feel like I have the tools I need at my disposal. Let me try to find them, build them, and then go share them with the world. And that's what I did. It was a little crazy, to be honest. And I wish that maybe it unfolded differently, but that's the path that I took. And I guess in some ways, that's like where I am today.
Absolutely. What was the age difference, I guess, when you started to do research and figure out what was going on, and then you started writing the book from the time you were 18?
So I started writing the book when I was 26. So about 8 years, and it takes a while to write a book. So I was doing that for like a year or two. So yeah, I think what I say about the journey and the insights and learnings and stuff is I essentially went out for those 8 years, sometimes intentionally and sometimes unintentionally, just living my life and going through anxiety and whatnot, with the desire of figuring this thing out and healing myself. And eventually, right, like all of those battles kind of came together to help me essentially like distill a lot of information around anxiety in my mind and figure out what worked and what didn't. And then there was specifically an episode of anxiety that I went through in 2015. So I was 25 at the time. And it was just kind of this, I don't know. I'll say the stars aligned, but I don't mean it in like the grandest sense. I just mean that, like, the dots connected, right? Was I had spent so much time reading material, going to therapy, trying to figure out different tactics that would help me, that then at 25, I'm going through this prolonged anxiety episode. And I remember sitting down with myself one day and I'm like, I have to I have to do something because to live through this anxiety day after day after day is no way to live and it stinks. And it was almost as if my brain sort of was like a sponge, right? Those last 7, 8 years, soaking up all this information and then going through this anxiety episode where like it was almost as if somebody stepped on the sponge and everything poured out. And what basically happened was like I started journaling a lot, I started writing a lot, I started writing down different things that had helped me. And it was almost as if, I had my own methodologies that were kind of like in my brain somewhere. And I finally started putting them to paper. And it was like that stressful event that got me to do so. And then as I was working through all of that, like I said earlier, it's like the writing is healing for me, but then I'm also helping other people. I I started obviously like if you start writing a book, like you want to share your message with other people and you want to help them. But I really did start by trying to help myself. And then as I started doing that and I'm like reading back my own content and talking to other people about it, it became more and more apparent to me that, I had some decent ideas that it seemed as though if I shared those with other people, um, it might be helpful for them. And so that kind of got me a little excited to say like this is not just my own journey now, like hopefully I'm going to share this with other people and I'm going to, create some positive effect on their life. And that's really like the mission that I engage in day after day today, which is to basically say anything on the mental health front, I write about it, I talk about it. Um, I share my insights and my thoughts with my audience and other folks' audience like yourself, just to try to contribute to the space and let other folks know that they're not alone, and most importantly, provide them with actionable tactics that might improve their life or their lot in life.
Yes, absolutely. So you've shared that you spent about 10 years battling anxiety and depression. What did that season of your life really look like behind the scenes?
Yeah. It's interesting because I was struggling with those things throughout that whole time period. And I do want to put my hand up and say it's not like they're all gone for the rest of my life, right? It's like still struggle with these things from time to time. The difference is like I have things that help me now. So I have my tools and I have my strategies and all that. Back then it was very different, right? I was a much younger person. I didn't know myself as well. I didn't know what was helpful for me, what wasn't helpful, and I didn't know the ins and outs of these conditions where, it's sort of one of those scary things where if you have a panic attack and you've never had one, for example, you might think that you're having a heart attack, right? And that is a really harrowing thing to go through. Now, each subsequent panic attack is still scary, but once you've figured out that, your heart racing uncontrollably and you feeling as though, something horrible is about to happen, it's still not fun to go through something like that, but you at least know the ins and outs of it. And you can say to yourself, okay, yep, my heart is racing for this specific reason, or this is par for the course with anxiety, for example. Therefore, I don't need to work myself up further as a result of the uncertainty of not knowing what I'm going through right now. I know that this is scary, but again, par for the course. So when it came to like day to day of those experiences and all that, I think it might be helpful to focus on depression, especially because, depression is like a condition, right? Where you really can and you do fall into a pit of despair or sort of the red, if you will, right? To go along with the theme of your show. And I mean, when you hit a depressive episode, you hit a low and you are in a really bad place where you're like, I don't even know if I can get out of bed in the morning. I don't even know if I can go to work. I don't even know if I want to exist anymore. And so it becomes a very very difficult battle, obviously. It's kind of like a battle for your soul in a way, or battle of your soul. And the goal obviously is to get back to some sort of healthy functioning where, you have a desire to live and to get out of bed and all that. And, getting back into the black, if you will, can be a real struggle. For me, like, I had one very large depressive episode that was in 2018. It lasted for like about a year. Um, what I would say, right, like how I describe it a lot is that it was sort of, in a way, it was like I look at that experience and I think to myself, I was definitely still a boy or a child before that experience, And on the other side of it, I felt more like an adult and I felt as though the episode changed me a lot. And it really became sort of like a philosophical battle in the sense of like where it came from and what I struggled with and all of that. And I will get into that, which is to say, I struggled with, I would say, like four things specifically pretty mightily during this time. The first was going into the episode or like right before the episode, I was in a job that I did not like at all. I'd kind of resigned myself to it. Obviously, we all have to put food on the table and pay the bills and whatnot. And so I was not, I didn't have the liberty to just quit the job and still be able to pay my bills. So I plowed forward with the job and the misery. And I said to myself, like, I got to interview, I got to try to find a new job. And I did. So I kind of came up with this narrative in my head, which a lot of us do. It's the I'll be happy when narrative, right? And so we're sitting in some situation or we're thinking about something and we say to ourselves, I'm not happy now, but if something happens in the future, this specific thing, or I get to this other destination, then I will finally be happy. And I had never really like, yeah, sure. We all have goals in our minds and we're like, oh yeah, I want to get the new car or whatever, a new video game or something. And that'll make me happy. And I think this really like this version of that like hit me at a fundamental level where I started to see that that logic in general just like doesn't really hold water. It's sort of you eventually find yourself on the hedonic treadmill where you get the new thing and then you find yourself adapting to it and then eventually you want something else, right? And you are almost never satisfied for as long as you thought you would be. And so during this period, I'm working this job. I tell myself, hey, I just want to work on my writing. I want to have more control over my schedule. I want to have more flexibility. And so I was lucky enough to land like a consulting gig as a software developer. And I thought to myself, like, that will allow me to have more control over my time, right? It's not like I have a boss anymore. And I can plan out my schedule and I can do the work when I think is best to do it, right? If I want to work at night, I can do that. If I want to work in the morning, I can do that. If I want to split the day apart and work on writing in the middle, I was like, I will just have more control and I will be happier when I get this job. So fast forward like 6 months, essentially, I have the new arrangement. I'm doing some writing, not as much as I wanted to, but I am doing some, and I'm just profoundly miserable. And I think what I found was like many different things. One, right, being that we often paint this really rosy picture of what things are going to be like when we get to this new destination, and sometimes they are good. Sometimes that destination is good, and we're happy about it. We're excited about it, at least for this one. And I think again, we do fall prey to this pitfall like a decent amount if we think about it. But this was just not the role that was really best for me. And I couldn't really admit it to myself because I had put it on such a high pedestal. I'm thinking to myself, I'm supposed to be happy here. And so instead of course correcting and saying, well, okay, let me go find something else that I like better, I just sat in my shame and I was like, I'm supposed to like this. I don't like it. What's wrong with me? Kind of thing. And specifically why I didn't like that arrangement so much was I was very isolated. I would work from home, which to most people sounds amazing, and it is great for like a week. And after a couple weeks, a month, like we all saw during COVID, you go stir crazy and you're like, I got to be around other people, I got to collaborate with other people and all that. I guess some other things, right, was like I used to walk to work. It was several miles, but I enjoyed it and it got me outside, fresh air, out of my head and whatnot. And during this time period, like I wasn't doing that anymore. And it wasn't that I couldn't walk at all, but like it was just that my routine didn't put me in that all the time naturally. And so I really found myself alone at home, isolated, not walking off and regulating myself and walking off my emotions as often as I should be. And so I'm just going to dark places in my mind day after day after day. And that's not helpful. That's bucket one. I think I said there was four buckets. Let me see if I can remember them all. But around that time, I don't know. I just like it was. I could tell you the full story, but I'll go kind of halvesies. Which is, I was, there's a website that I used to go to, is a technology news website, And I went onto it one day and I essentially like stumbled onto this article that, by the title and the little image with it and whatnot, I was like, oh, that's interesting. I want to read it. And at the time, I hadn't, like, I knew of the term climate change and that climate change is probably bad and all that. But I read this article and it just put me in this horrifically doom and gloom state of like, oh my goodness, like this is so bad and we're destroying the planet and so on and so forth. And like, how can I have kids if the planet's not going to, if we're going to wipe humanity off the face of the earth and XYZ? I went to really, really dark places. And so, slowly but surely, these different categories or buckets are like starting to pull me into this depressive spiral of me starting to see things as helpless and hopeless. Um, the third bucket would be for a variety of reasons. And I mean, one of them really was like seeing my nephew grow up, like the fact that he was, I think at the time he would have been like 2.5. And just like, we were taking him to different places that we used to go as kids. And it just started to really hit me. I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm not a kid anymore. I'm actually almost 30 years old. It feels like my life flashed by before my eyes. I don't know how I got to basically age 30. Is the rest of my life going to go by at that same blistering pace? And that, again, like these buckets are adding up and pulling me into this state of despair. And so those three actually were the main drivers at first, and they put me into such a headspace of like a so much darkness, thinking about life is so short. And man, like if what I want and if I got what I wanted, right, on many occasions, especially with this job, and I'm still not happy, what am I supposed to do? Right. My brain almost came to this conclusion of saying, you get what you want, you're still not happy. Life flies by before your eyes. We're destroying the planet, like gloom and doom all over the place. So I fall into this depressive state and I cannot, it really became almost like OCD, where I could not stop thinking about these scary things day after day, minute after minute, thinking about, how quick life goes by, how short it is, and the fact that, we may destroy the planet, but also you look around and all the struggles in your own life and grief and death and all of that. And somewhere, maybe a couple months into that, actually, my grandmother passed away. I was very close with my grandmother. She was one of like the most loving people in my life. And I still miss her every day. Um, the hardest thing about that for me, like I still consider myself lucky. Like, I mean, she lived to 90. It's not like it was a horrific out of the blue tragedy or anything like that. But what was really difficult for me was she had dementia and she degraded very, very, I don't know if I'd say rapidly, but very strongly. And, I would go visit her a lot, and to see those changes, to go visit her and see how different she was and almost see that she wasn't there anymore. Like the person that I knew as Nana was just, she was gone. That messed with my headspace so bad. And that pulled me further into that funk of thinking about life and, the brevity of existence and the meaning of life and all of that. And so I really struggled for like close to a year, with all these different things. And what really helped me was, I think, kind of by luck in a way, right? So I write in my second book on depression, saying that like what ends up happening is like you fall so far and you hit this depressive low where you are helpless and you feel helpless and you feel hopeless. And you know, you could theoretically go out there and change something in your life and then see that your life has changed, and you could look at, back out at your life and the world and say, oh, I changed my life, I have the capacity for that, and therefore, these feelings of helplessness and hopelessness, they're not as justified as my mind is making them out to be, because I am creating change in the world and in my own life. And so if I lean into that agency, that's the opposite of helplessness and hopelessness. Maybe I could get my life back on track. And so when it comes to depression, a lot, there's obviously many different factors, but the core thing, right, is like realigning with what you want out of your life and therefore rebuilding your life in a way that pulls you forward out of that helplessness and out of that hopelessness. And I said, I got a little lucky, right? Was I was working on that client project, that consulting project that I didn't enjoy. And I outlined some of the reasons for why I didn't enjoy it. But the other tough thing was I that with that project, it's kind of like a first world problem, but it was still a problem nonetheless. And I can look back at that now and understand that. But at the time, it kind of fed that shame cycle, right? Where I'm sitting there thinking to myself, I have this consulting agreement or this arrangement where the client doesn't actually have a lot for us to do. Um, I have to go into their office sometimes and sort of twiddle my thumbs or pretend to be busy. And I know to folks that are sitting around saying like, "Hey, I don't have a job." Being able to twiddle your thumb sounds great. I would love that, and I totally get that. But at the same time, I know that sitting around 40 hours a week with nothing to do, with no interesting work, with no project or anything like that, that is for me the way that my mind works. That is a recipe for disaster because what that means is I sit at my desk and I stew over scary things. Right? I know now that I need to be occupied by interesting things. And it doesn't have to be the craziest thing in the world, right? It might just be, hey, I'm playing a video game that has my attention. I'm writing a blog post that I'm really interested in. I'm doing something fun with my friends. If I'm sitting down at my desk or anywhere else on the couch and I am unoccupied and my anxious mind starts wandering, it's not long before really bad things happen. And I mean that in the emotional sense. And so what got me out of that or helped get me out of that was actually that client like ended the engagement. They were kind of like, yeah, there's not a ton of work here. We haven't gotten a lot out of the contractors because like we haven't really had a full project. So we're moving on. And at first, like, that kind of came as a shock or a difficulty because I'm thinking to myself, well, there goes my income stream. That kind of stinks. But it forced me into having to look for a new project. And so I eventually found a project that was very engaging. We were building something fun. It was a small team, close knit team. We all went to the office and like, shot the breeze every day and whatnot. And so I look back at that time, I think to myself, that became the thing that opened my eyes again to say, you could find things that you're passionate about. You could find things that you're interested in. You could find things that hold your attention once again. And once you're doing things like that, you're going to start rebuilding your life. And once your life is, I don't know, sufficiently or adequately rebuilt, you're going to look back and you're going to say, I have passion in my life again. I have excitement. And therefore, like my depression has lifted, at least temporarily. And that was kind of the path was over time, over the course of a year or two, I had to slowly rebuild my life. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I successfully did that in every single capacity, but I did that in enough capacities to look back and say, okay, I'm heading back in a good direction. And that removes the helplessness and removes the hopelessness from me and allows me to feel as though I can take action in the world and good things can happen. And one of the funny things, this is the last thing I'll say and then I'll pause, is for me, that depressive episode really like my OCD was very, very active during that time. So for folks who are listening, right, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, essentially you'll get a lot of intrusive thoughts and thoughts that you don't want to think about. And then as a result of that, you will run these rituals or you'll engage in these rituals, these compulsions to try to help you distract yourself from those things, right? And the from the thoughts. The really tricky or challenging thing about OCD is that the problem or the obsession that arises is not always the real problem that you need to solve. It actually can end up becoming this distraction that your brain is trying to put you through in order to prevent you from seeing the real work that you need to do. And so in my case, right, I'm spinning the wheels in my mind day after day, thinking about life and death, the meaning of life, climate change, the afterlife, all of these really big and heavy subjects. When I look back, I'm like, it doesn't actually make a ton of sense. Like, yeah, those things are scary. And sure, we'd all love to have concrete and real answers to those. If we were like, hey, like everybody goes to heaven and the world's going to be fine, like that would be reassuring. At the same time, you eventually get to the point where you say to yourself, I'm not going to solve any of these subjects, right? Me just continuing to sit around and think about them, like I'm not actually getting anywhere. And so for me, I didn't see it in real time. I only saw it looking back. Was I saw that these obsessions with these big scary things became my OCD, or my flavor of OCD in that moment, that were my distractions from the real work that I needed to do. And that real work was actually rebuilding my life and living a life that I gave any amounts of craps about, And the challenge is, even though we'd kind of sit here and we'd say, rationally speaking, thinking about all those big scary ideas like climate change and death and whatnot, that sounds horrifying and terrible. It actually kind of sounds easier to just change your life and improve your life and whatnot, right? But the problem is that, like, with those big scary things, the quote unquote easy thing about them is that there isn't anything to do, right? So it's a convenient obsession for your brain to come up with. Whereas to actually admit to yourself that you don't like the situation that you got yourself into in life, and to then change your job and change your relationships and go out and try to meet new people, change the way that you interact with other people and go through deep healing and introspection and go to therapy and all of that stuff. You have to confront all your own demons and all your own difficulties, and to the brain or to the mind, that sounds scarier often than dealing with those big gloom and doom subjects. And so in time, I was able to look back and say, almost as if the indication, the presence of the OCD was an indication that I was off track. And the more that I found myself walking that path, I'm saying to myself, okay, that means I have some work to do. And I now am trying to integrate that into my own life more and more and say, like, sure, I lived through that episode of depression and eventually it got better, but like life is full of ups and downs. And, like when you deal with mental health disorders, like if you deal with OCD, it doesn't just disappear overnight, right? It can come back in different varieties. And so I still try to take these lessons and apply them to my own life today, and look critically at my life and say, like, where can I improve things? Where can I work through some of my emotions? And eventually, maybe could I take the lessons and the learnings that I come up with there, create new content, write a new book, and help more people by sharing that information? I know that was super long winded, so thank you for listening, but that's what I wanted to say.
Always finding a purpose that gives your life meaning is very, very helpful, I have found. All right, so let's skip to, for someone listening right now who feels stuck in their own abyss, what is one practical first step they can take today?
It's a great question. Um, how I want to frame this is in saying that if we're talking about the abyss, right, which I kind of use as a stand-in for depression, it means that person is probably like at a low, right? And they're, like you said, they're stuck. If we then think about depression and what it means, what the definition of it is, we've used these terms throughout the conversation. I would say state of helplessness, state of hopelessness, right? And from those two states, you look out and you say, okay, if somebody feels that way, then that means that they feel as though they don't have agency over their own life or probably any part of their own life. And so the small change that they could make, and we really would want to focus on starting small, because we don't want to discourage folks, and two, like, we want to make it so that what they can do, or like what we ask them to do, is achievable and also gets them on the right path without again discouraging them. Is we're trying, like, I would recommend, or what I would say is, I would like for that person to try to rediscover some form of agency in their life, which means go out, take some action, get positive feedback from the world, their environment, their life, and then use that positive feedback in a bit of a feedback loop to say, okay, I went out and I did something that gave me a positive emotion. And again, it could be really small, but I'm going to use that feedback to then go engage in something else. And so I talk about this concept a lot when I'm speaking on depression, which is essentially like, I kind of call it like the flywheel of agency. And so if you think about, everything that we've talked about thus far on agency and all that, if you think about Like, if you go to a conference or whatever and they have one of those wheels with all the little dots on the outside and they spin the wheel and all the dots like hit the little marker, if you will, or the pointer until, and the wheel keeps spinning or whatever until it stops. Um, Somebody who is depressed or somebody who's stuck in a low, if we were to say that their emotional state were a flywheel, one of those wheels, that wheel is stopped, right? And so what we really need to do is we need to take action after action. And I don't say that in a way to overwhelm folks. I just say in the smallest ways possible, we need to start stacking actions such that that agency flywheel starts to move again and then eventually keeps moving under its own momentum. It's something like a bike wheel because, I guess the agency flywheel, it may stop eventually under its own power or stop because of the marker, if you will. But if you think more of like a car wheel or a bike wheel, we want to be able to put enough agency into that through our actions that that thing starts spinning or continues spinning on its own. So what does that look like? That really looks like starting as small as you can, come up with a goal for yourself that would allow you to look at it and say, I did something of positive effect today. I improved my life or I contributed to my life in a small but meaningful way. And to keep it concrete without, because obviously there's a million ways that we could take things from here. Like if somebody is stuck in a depressive low or just some kind of low, it's very contextual or subjective based on the person. But let's say like somebody can't get out of bed today because they're stuck in a depressive low, right? I would recommend that they come up with a reasonable goal for themselves. And it's very subjective based on where that person is. So if that person has not gotten out of bed today, the goal would be to say, "Hey, tomorrow try to get out of bed for 20 minutes. Try to get out of bed for 30 minutes." And not in the sense of, get up and eat and do the things that you were doing otherwise. Try to add to your day such that today is better than yesterday was. And continue stacking those wins day after day after day. I will say that, obviously with life in general, um, emotional lows, depressive lows, they're not linear, right? We often take 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or 5 steps forward, 1,000 steps back, what have you. The idea is to just keep building as you can. And if you have to reset week after week, that is totally fine. The idea is essentially keep stacking those wins when you can, give yourself credit for them when they happen. And then hopefully, right, over time, you're going to start building that agency back or that sense of agency. And so if you start out by saying, I'm going to get out of bed for 20 minutes today, and then, the next day, 25 minutes, the next day, 30, whatever, over the course of time, again, even though the journey is not always linear, we want to be able to look back and say, okay, well, I started at 20 minutes. A month later, yeah, I had a couple days where I had a setback or whatever, but a month later, I'm at 2 hours, or I'm at 2 hours and I went for a walk, or I'm in a low because I don't have a job, and a month into it or a week into it or whatever, I sent my resume to 4 companies. So it's just having tangible things that you can point to in the world that show you that you're starting to reclaim that agency over your own life. And the goal is over the course of time, you're going to keep taking those actions, and it's not going to be pretty. I will absolutely say that. It's going to be very difficult, it's going to be challenging, it's probably going to be very emotional. But the goal is over time, right? You're going to add or stack up enough of those small wins that eventually you will look back and your flywheel will have been moving already. And because the progression was slow, you will kind of not even realize that it was doing that. And you'll look back and you'll say, wow, I actually find myself in a much better spot right now. And that is the goal. And from there, keep stacking those wins until you get back to the place of feeling as though you have rebuilt your life and you feel good. Now, I obviously simplified things. And like I said, nothing, none of this journey is linear, but I would say, like, lean on your support system, talk to other people, work through this with other people, find people that you can trust, right? The name of my brand is Get Out of Your Head. It's not meant to be dismissive or anything like that, of saying, just get out of your head. It's understanding that your mind is going to create undue suffering for you if you don't work with it in the ways that it needs to be worked with. And so part of that is giving yourself ways to effectively get out of your head. And one of the great ways is to talk to other people. Work through your emotions with other people. If you can find a social worker, if you can find a therapist, if you can find a sibling, a parent, a trusted loved one, whatever, get your story out there outside of yourself, outside of your own head. Get those emotions out there and see how other people work through them with you. Give them that opportunity. And when you add all those simple things together, I think in time, you will, yeah, again, it's not pretty. It takes a while, but in time, I think you will eventually get that flywheel going and start feeling better.
Awesome. Absolutely. So, how has helping others impacted your own healing and relationship with your mental health?
It's a good question. I mean, first and foremost, I would just say that like when I hear from folks and when I hear the impact that, some of the books or blog posts or podcasts have had on people, I mean, that's the most meaningful work I've ever done in my life, hands down, like no question about it. And it means a lot to hear that. It obviously helps me right on my own journey. Um, but I think the most important thing is talking to folks and getting more ideas as to like what is resonating and what is not resonating, right? And then if I'm talking to a lot of my audience and they're saying, "Hey, this specific thing is working," and I find a common pattern there, then to me that's evidence that I need to lean into that more and more. So maybe I'll, talk about that subject more, write about it more, whatever. That's the most helpful thing. I also think that just in general, right, is like I would love one day for like the Get Out of Your Head brand or my author brand or whatever to feel as though it creates a sense of community or there is a community there. And I think like, when you travel together in packs in the sense of like, if I talk to a lot of people that go through the same things, we are like-minded and we have similar experiences, right? And just hearing those experiences can be very transformative. And so talking to listeners, talking to readers, getting their stories is really helpful for me as well because it helps me clarify my own ideas. It helps me work through similar situations, maybe problems that they're going through, and clarify all of it because we are, like I said, again, we're in that same community, and therefore we go through similar things. So, like as we share more and more ideas with each other, it tends to be that like those ideas usually land well with people in that general audience.
I definitely agree with that. Absolutely. Looking back, what does being in the black mean to you now, mentally, emotionally, and personally?
Another good question. It's funny because my family, it's kind of like a line of accountants and wealth managers, and so I've seen a lot of spreadsheets. My mom did a lot of tax returns and bookkeeping as a kid, and I would always see like the real life representation of a company being in the red versus a tax return or a set of bookkeeping or whatever being in the black. And for businesses, right, you're trying to break even, you're trying to get back to that place of profitability and to feel good. And I think mentally, right, it's like the red is anytime that you're really struggling to stay above water, right, whether it's with anxiety or depression or OCD, something in that family. Getting back to the black, right, is being able to take that breath again and say, okay, like I did a lot of work. I worked on myself. I tried to work through my emotions. And I finally feel as though I can breathe again. I feel as though I'm not being submerged or pushed down day after day by these various conditions. And that's a great place to be. And I mean, I think that is the goal for everyone, right? Who reads books like mine, who listens to podcasts like these, is we're all trying to find a way to tread water sustainably and stay above water. And when we can find ourselves in that place and take that breath, it feels really good.
Awesome. So, where can our listeners find you?
Yeah, best place to find me would be getoutofyourhead.com. On Instagram, the handle is getoutofyourhead. Same thing. So,
All right. Is there anything else that you want to share with the audience that I didn't get to ask you or think about?
I mean, as you could probably tell, I could talk about this stuff for hours. So it's hard to pick anything specific. What I would say is, folks who are listening who feel as though they're in the red right now, my heart goes out to you. I would just say to keep your head up, keep fighting on. My heart is, I'm right there with you, and I hope things get better for you, and that, honestly, like things usually do get better, but it can take that time that we talked about. And so, don't lose the hope that you have. Keep your eyes set on the black and the understanding that you're going to get there at some point soon.
Awesome. Very nice. Well, it was very nice to have you on the podcast and sharing a little bit of how you're making a difference in people's lives. Did you always know that you were going to be a writer?
I didn't know that, to be honest. It really came out of the my own struggles, and a way of trying to express myself.
That's awesome. Now that you have written a book, do you see yourself writing more?
So I have the two right now. I do think I would love to write another one, and I feel like I have a good amount of material for it. The question is like, I mean, it's really just, um, what's the right word? It's really just like finances, to be honest. I'm 35. I live in Boston. Boston's very expensive. A book is very time consuming to write. I'm not in the position financially to be able to leave my job and work on my writing full time. At some point, I would love to do that, but until I do that, I don't know if I can necessarily find time for another book. So hopefully in the future, but not in the immediate future. I don't think.
Yeah. Have you always lived in Boston?
Pretty much. I lived in Florida for a year. I lived in Miami, but otherwise, I have been here.
Why'd you leave Miami?
Um, it just wasn't the right setup, to be honest. I went in. I lived with one of my good friends. We were not in a good location, and I there was so many like random kind of things that came together in the wrong way. I had like dreamed of moving to Florida because I love warm weather and I don't like the winter. And I lined up this job before I left for Miami. I lined up the job. I signed the lease in Miami. I'm all excited. The company falls apart before I get to Miami, so I don't have
Mhm.
that job. I moved down there. I had like I had been to the apartment before. It was essentially like my good friend's roommate moved out 2 months into his lease, and so I had an opportunity to take the rest of the lease for like 10 months. I had been to that apartment before, but it's very different when you are like, hey, I'm in Miami on vacation versus like I live here now. And it was a bad neighborhood. We are very isolated. It's literally an island, like the neighborhood itself. And so like I didn't have a job down there. I'm like sitting on the couch all day trying to find, contracting work and whatnot. And I did find some, but I had no, I knew three people down there. I had no other friends. I had no network. I just struggled a lot. And we were 24. Like we went out all the time. And I'd wake up at like 3 p.m. on Sunday and be like, what am I doing with my life? And so, I was like, when the lease ends, I'm going to get out of here. And maybe I didn't do Miami right, and maybe I didn't give it a fair shake, but it was just not. I was going to lose my mind if I stayed down there any longer.
Miami of all places. That place is expensive as well.
Yeah.
Well, we did get to move to down to Florida, so that's been fun and definitely don't miss that cold weather you guys have right now.
Where'd you go from, and where are you now?
Missouri, Springfield, Missouri to
Okay,
Tampa, Florida.
awesome. Tampa's cool.
Yeah. Thank you for being here. If something you heard today moved you, share it with someone you love. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can follow me on Instagram at In the Black Passion Project for more behind the scenes and guest spotlights. And remember, no matter where you've been, you're not behind. You're becoming. Stay in the black.